So if you guys are anything like me, and by that I mean a ball knower, this week, nothing else matters in the world. We have got week 1 just a few days away, and no matter work, relationships, physical activities, time outside, everything is revolving around football, and we are just heading toward what is going to be an amazing weekend. Thank you guys for tuning into the latest episode of the SpringBlake College Football Show that is your favorite ball knower's favorite ball knowing show. Today is Wednesday, August 27th, and we have got just a full-on game preview episode coming your way. We are also going to dive into some of my early bets for the week. We're going to talk some of the lines, but we've obviously got Texas, Ohio State, Alabama, Florida State, LSU, Clemson. We're going to break down all of those games, give you my picks, bets, all of that stuff. Before we get into that, make sure to please support this show. If it is your first time here listening to the SpringBlake College Football Show, first of all, thank you. I'm SpringBlake. The show is college football. If it's your first time and you're on YouTube, please leave a like. Please subscribe to the channel. Please interact and let me know your thoughts and share it with a few friends while you're at it. If you are listening, Apple, Spotify, wherever you may get your podcast, make sure to like, share, subscribe, leave a 5-star review, and head to the socials. I'm going to mention that a few times on this show. A lot of stuff that I can't fit into this show is going to live on Twitter and TikTok. That is at SpringBlakeCFB. So make sure to head over there, give me a follow, interact with me, as we're about to head into just what's a loaded college football season. So as I've already said, we've got too many games to break down and preview to really fit much of anything else into Wednesday's show here. So we're not going to waste any time. Let's rip the lid off. How lucky are we to kick off Saturday with one of the best opening season games we could ask for? The Texas Longhorns, quarterbacked by Arch Manning, in his first game as the team's full-time starter, traveling up to Columbus, where they'll face the defending national champion Ohio State Buckeyes. Now, throughout this preseason and fall camp, we've spent more than enough time talking about the rosters, the strengths, weaknesses that both carry. The one thing that we haven't touched on with both of these teams is how little production they are returning from a season prior. Ohio State is 101st in the nation, and Texas is down at 103rd. So many new pieces, two very brand new teams, but also two of the few programs across the nation where that doesn't really matter as much. There are stars across the board. There are stars across the board that you do not know yet. They've just had to kind of wait their turn to introduce themselves to you all, and they will do so this upcoming weekend. So with all these game previews, where do we start first? What do I know about both of these teams? For Texas, I know, ball knower here knows, that the offense is going to perform at a higher level than it did last season. And you may say, oh, that's crazy, Blake. They were really good last season. They lost a lot of guys. There's so much unknown. How can you say that? But what we're failing to recognize is that they have a lot of stuff that they didn't have last year. C.J. Baxter, hurt last preseason, is a force at the running back position, and the tandem with him and Contrevion Wisner will be one of the best in this sport. And despite losing 2 wide receivers to the NFL, this group will have more pop than it did in 2024. Matthew Golden came along late into the 2024 college football season. He was not a household name through the first 6 to 7 weeks, and Isaiah Bond, for all things considered, was a disappointment in 2024. Now the duo is Ryan Wingo and DeAndre Moore, and I do believe they'll have a bigger impact on this offense than Bond and Golden did, especially at the start of the season. And then we also know that the offense is getting an upgrade at the quarterback position. Sure, same as I said before, you might be saying, oh, how can you say that? He hasn't played yet. We don't know what it's going to look like, and fine. I'll give you, maybe he's not as good of a thrower as Quinn Ewers was, but he is not a statue at the quarterback position, something that hampered this offense all last year, especially with their shaky offensive line, and that's something that's going to make things a little bit easier to start off this season if the line isn't great in weeks 1 through 4. You know, Arch, at the very least, is a fantastic athlete, runner. I think he's going to open up more in this offense. So give me that at least. And then I also reserve the right to believe that I think Arch is also a better quarterback, passer, thrower than Ewers was. But I guess if you want, we can wait a little bit longer before I take my victory lap. So that's what I know I'm getting out of the Texas Longhorns heading into this upcoming season. Now, for Ohio State, I know that they have two of the, top 4 or 5 players in the sport. Jeremiah Smith, best offensive player in the game. Him and the rest of these wideouts will be a really tough test for Texas's good, but somewhat new secondary. I think they've got at least 2 starters between safety and corner. Good players, as I mentioned, but again, new pieces figuring things out on the back end of that defense, and a really tough matchup with Ohio State. I am very interested to see how the new Ohio State Buckeyes offensive coordinator Brian Hartline, who's also the longtime wide receivers coach, responsible for all these studs we've come to know from OSU, dials things up. What is that offense going to look like out the gate? It's a new season with a new young quarterback, but Ohio State was at its best last year when they were pushing the ball down the field and playing into the team's best strengths, which were its wideouts. Does he allow his new quarterback, Julian Sain, to do that out the gate? We'll have to find out. I also know that this is one of those programs where you should never doubt the new waves of talent that come through. And if there's one room in particular where they just rinse and repeat talent better than anyone else, it's at the edge position. Kenyatta Jackson, Caden Curry, the 2 guys that are next, I guess. Last year it was Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau. Years before it was the Bosa brothers. They always just have these waves of great edge rushers coming through. I think both of those guys will have an advantage over Texas's tackles. And I do think that they'll need to be difference makers in their first career starts if they're going to halt that Longhorn offense. Now, what do I think I know from Ohio State? I think I know that it's going to take a little bit of time for the plane to get off the tarmac, especially on defense. A new defensive coordinator, all but 3 new starters on the defense. And again, that's not to say they're bad. People get upset when I say that. It's not that I think these guys aren't talented. I just told you that I think they are. But it's just not going to be great at this point of the season. Talk to me in week 10 when I think they're humming and everything has gotten figured out between the coordinators and the players. I'll buy into it then. I just don't think it's going to be that way week 1 against a really talented Texas offense. And I also think I know that this running game, much like the defense, needs to prove itself before I can buy into it. You not only have to replace Trevion Henderson, you have to replace Quinshon Judkins, but Chip Kelly is now back in the NFL, and you lose what was the best run game designer in the sport. So that's a lot to change on offense. And for a young quarterback, I don't care how great the receivers are, you need to be two-dimensional. You can't just be focused on the passing game. And now for Texas, what I think I know is that there's reason to be worried about the interior parts of both sides of the trenches. We've talked about the offensive line a lot, so I don't need much more to say besides they better hope that OSU's running game, that OSU's defensive front isn't getting to arch on a consistent basis. But defensive tackle is the greater concern here. And it's not in a way that I think they're just going to get wiped off the board and Ohio State's going to be facing second and third or third and short. But I just wonder if Ohio State is able to do that, run the ball consistently between the tackles, that it means the best parts of this defense can't play into their strengths. We love the linebacking duo. We love the edge rushers. If it's third and short and Ohio State can just run 5-6 yards at a clip, I don't love that you're kind of minimizing the impact that best players on this Texas defense start. So the focal point of this is obviously to make Julian Sain uncomfortable. But if he doesn't need to do all that much, it might be hard to get them off the field or change momentum with a big sack or a big turnover in this game. So that's what I think I know, what I know from both teams. We're now going to kick it over to the SpringBlake College Football Stat Department, which, if you are watching on YouTube, is a really dumb bit I'm just going to throw out during these game previews. Stat Department says, for Ohio State, Texas. And first of all, stats are just great when they back up what I believe in them. And that being said, I love the stat I have in this game. The Texas Longhorns are 6-0 straight up and 5-1 against the spread in their last 6 openers, while Ohio State is 0-3-1 against the spread in their last 4 season openers. So thank you to the SpringBlake College Football Stat Department. Get the nerds out of the sports. Is it the stats department, analytics department? We'll find out. We'll toy around with it as the season goes on. So what this game boils down to for me is I think that this game was played last season. And I am not talking about the semifinals match between these two teams in the college football playoffs. Last year, in week 2, Steve Sarkisian led his team into Ann Arbor to take on the then defending national champion Michigan Wolverine. a team littered with defensive talent yet again, but a new defensive coordinator, and Sark put them in a blender. 31 points, 400 yards of total offense. I believe that Steve Sarkisian versus Matt Patricia is the greatest mismatch in this game. And even if Ohio State is putting points up on their own, I think Sark and Arch will make an emphatic introduction to the world this Saturday and win by a final score of 35-23. Now, for our betting perspectives, we are going to buy a half point for this game, get the Longhorns down to a nice juicy +3, and we're going to throw that in as one of my best bets for the week. And I also love the Texas team total of over 23.5. Still got to feel out the rest of the board. I may double down on this game and make them, 2 of my best 5 bets for the week. But for now, we're just going to take Texas. I like getting them down to +3. I think that this is one of those games that we've already seen kind of play out. When you have Sark and you have a talented offensive system heading into a team that is really good but still figuring things out and also doesn't have a lot of time to figure things out, that's when Sark is at his best. I think he's going to expose the OSU defense. Maybe it's specifically in the front 7, but either way, I think Texas is going to put up a lot of points. I think OSU will be able to respond here and there. Again, 35-23, it sounds like a big blowout, but I think that's a good showing for the Buckeyes in week 1 with all the new pieces they have. So Texas wins that game, and I cannot wait to watch this one unfold. So let's take a little break from game previews. There is one other thing that I want us to put in for this show, and as I will continue to mention every single show, SpringBlake, ChatGPT, head-to-head to see who knows ball more. Who's the better ball knower? Am I better than AI? I'm off to a blazing start. We're doing 5 best bets a week. I went 4-1 on Saturday. ChatGPT went 1-4. So already off to a fantastic start. I'm not going to get comfortable just yet. There's a lot more football to be played. A lot of things can go wrong for me. That being said, for week 1, I don't have my full card ready just yet, but there are some games kicking off earlier in the week that I want to get in on now. So let's go to Thursday night, where I'm going to take Rutgers -15.5 over the Ohio Bobcats. Now, Rutgers was a pretty hot team to close out 2024. 4 wins, 2 close losses to pretty talented teams. And they bring back a lot of talent and have also started hot in Greg Schiano's second stint with the Scarlet Knights. He's 7-1 straight up and against the spread the last 8 seasons. I think one of those years was when it was the previous head coach, so I guess maybe if you want to take the last 7 years. But then again, this team has still started very hot out the gate. This will be a best bet, one of my 5 full unit plays we'll be taking, and I think we get a nice tune-up on Thursday night as we roll in and try and get some bankroll for Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and hell, even Monday, because week 1 of college football is such a blessing. Now, while not on my best bets card, I do think it's fun to let you know what games I'm still going to be taking on some smaller half-unit sized bets. Still on Thursday night, we're going to take Houston -22.5 over Stephen F. Austin. When I look at starts to the season, I think, what teams am I higher on than I think the general consensus or the betting market is? Houston is one of those teams, specifically on offense. Since it's a FCS versus FBS, we can't get team totals in here, so I'm not going to get on the over. I would have loved to take Houston's team total in points. Maybe if that play shows up before Thursday, I can get on it. But either way, this is Connor Wegman's reintroduction to the world, so we're going to take them to win by 23 or more. And then we're also going to bet Nebraska -6.5 over Cincinnati, a game in which I find to be kind of an oddly valued line. I know that it's on the road. I know that there's a lot of new pieces, and Cincinnati isn't like awful, but I do believe Nebraska will win by a touchdown or more. I think this is, again, another team that I'm just maybe a little bit more into than I think the betting markets might be at this point of the year. Now, make sure that if you are someone who wants every single one of my plays, to head over to Twitter and TikTok and follow @SpringBlakeCFB. I cannot get every bet in on this show. There are going to be ones we add later in the week. There's going to be ones that we add on Saturday that I don't know that I'm going to take. I can't get them on this show, but I will promise you that every play will be available there. And if you're also someone that has an account or uses the Action Network app, you can tail all my plays there as well. The handle is @SpringBlakeCFB. I'm just going to make everything the same handle so it's easy to find. All of my plays will be on Twitter, Action Network, TikTok, maybe. TikTok's kind of mean about the betting stuff. They don't really love promoting it as much, but I might put it on there nonetheless. All right, so let's keep things moving along. We are going to head to Tallahassee, where the Florida State Seminoles are going to play host to the Alabama Crimson Tide for the first time ever in college football history. You know where we're going. Let's talk about what we know from both of these teams. And for Alabama, I know that on paper, this team might have the best roster in the sport, and I know it's got a top 3 to 5 coaching staff in the nation to go with it. Now, outside of quarterback, of which we'll discuss, I think they've got top 10 positional units across the board, which will make things as simple as possible for Ty Simpson. Now, that being said, I also know that this team will miss Jam Miller significantly, that being their starting running back who got injured in the preseason. I believe it's a broken collarbone. He's going to be out for at least the next month. I know that they've got a stable of guys behind them, and there will be one that carves out that enhanced role that when Jam comes back, it's like a really nice 1-2 punch, but it will be something to monitor early on if FSU can turn the Tide into a more one-dimensional offense. But again, I still I know the Alabama offensive line should be sturdy enough where any back seems to have a pretty good day behind them. So that's what I know about the Alabama Crimson Tide. Now for Florida State, I know that the variance of outcomes for this team is substantial. And we could look no further than their last 2 seasons where they finished 13-0 in the regular season and ACC title game, and then followed it up with a 2-10 campaign. Now I know I don't believe either of those records to repeat itself, but it's also not far-fetched to say that this team is just as capable of a 4-8 season as they are an 8-4 season. Mike Norvell hits the portal hard every season, and because of that, what you get is kind of a total crapshoot. However, this year he took a much different approach than in years past. Instead of taking shots on unproven talents, high risk, high reward players, Norvell went a much more sturdy route and took productive, experienced guys that will significantly raise the floor of the roster. This isn't one where you're just like, you're not putting in a 10-leg parlay and putting $10 on it and just hoping that everything cashes and all of a sudden you're playing for a national championship. I think he saw okay, let's get 2 really sturdy money lines at -150. We'll put our money on that, and we know that we're going to at least bankroll things a little bit. So that's what is different about FSU compared to what they did last year. Last year it was just such a gamble, and the portal is always a gamble, but I think they took more proactive measures. They did things in a more sturdy manner than in years prior. Now, that being said, I think I know that Florida State's offense can't be worse than it was a year ago, scoring just 15 points per game and being -16 in the turnover margin. I also think that the moves they made, specifically on offense this offseason, should put them as one of the more improved programs in the nation. Gus Malzahn left the head coaching ranks to be Mike Norvell's offensive coordinator, and I believe he'll do, a really nice job elevating the talent of every positional group at Florida State, specifically at the quarterback position where Thomas Castellanos steps in after transferring out of Boston College. I'm not sure, and I don't believe we're going to get this prolific passing attack from Castellanos, but I do think he'll be used a ton more in the ground game than he was last year under Bill O'Brien in Boston College, and therefore you just add another layer of complexity to this Florida State offense. And let's just take a beat and remember what that might mean for Alabama. Last season, they really struggled with mobile quarterbacks. You think of their 2 biggest upset losses on the year being Oklahoma, Vanderbilt. Jackson Arnold in that game ran for 131 yards on the ground. Diego Pavia had 56. Mobile quarterbacks gave this defense fits. And for Florida State, I know you don't want to throw your new quarterback into harm's way, especially a guy that might be a little bit smaller. But I do think that might be the Seminoles' only shot to win the game on Saturday. So what matters more, a statement win over Alabama or throwing your quarterback into harm's way? That is one of the biggest keys to this game for me if Florida State is to compete and potentially even win. And what I think I know for the Crimson Tide, and I've said this all offseason, is that this team is a night and day difference from what they were in 2024. I think I know that the dumb penalties will be cleaned up. I think I know there will be better and more consistent communication on defense, and I think I know the offense won't run as hot and cold on a week in, week out basis depending on what version of Jalen Milroe showed up to the stadium. But is that all true? penalties, turnovers. These are the things that you can't guarantee to have control over. Has Kalen DeBoer tightened his grip around this roster hard enough to where they aren't one of the more penalized teams in the country? Is Ty Simpson, in his first year as a starter, capable of being a point guard for this offense, not throwing 11 picks like Milroe last year and just letting the talented players around him do the rest? I believe this to all be true, but if we're sitting here Saturday afternoon and Simpson has 2 picks and the defense can't get off a field because there's a late hit on Castellanos or a dumb holding, defensive holding call on 3rd and short, I'll definitely have doubts creep in my head, despite it's the first week of a new season, because those are just some of those things that crippled the Crimson Tide last year, and you cannot have them carry over if you are legitimately trying to be a national title contender. So that's what I think I know, and what I do know from both of these teams. Let's, of course, go to the stat department, put on my little nerdy glasses. Stat department says that there's not anything amazing in this game. But if you want something to add to your cards, the under is 14-4 over the last 18 games where the Seminoles were underdogs, of which, of course, they are here again. Again, that's not something I'm taking in I'm going to definitely put that in because we just spent time talking about how abysmal Florida State's offense was last year. So, of course, in a lot of those games, the under is going to hit if they were averaging 15 points a game. But regardless, it's a stat. That's what the stat department is here for. And now these glasses will come on off. So, for Florida State, Alabama, at the end of the day, we're comparing 2 different types of teams here. One that is solid across the board and one that is great across the board. And both of these statements can be true. The first being, Florida State is one of the more improved teams in the nation and could be in the mix for an ACC title game. And second, they shouldn't be on the same field with the Crimson Tide to start this season. Give me the Tide to win and cover in what I think will be a slightly low-scoring game. I will kind of lean toward that under bet, but I'm going to pick a final score of Alabama 30, Florida State 13. We will be adding the Crimson Tide to our best bets of the week, bringing us to 3 of my 5 best plays handed out to you by Wednesday, that being Alabama minus 13.5, Texas plus 3, and then we're also taking Rutgers minus 15.5 on Thursday night. I need a drink of water, so here is a nice, fun little segue.
You want to go to war?
All right, and we'll finish today's show out in Clemson, South Carolina, where we have a battle of Tigers in an AP poll top 10 matchup between Clemson and LSU. Huge game. A ton riding on for at least one of these teams, if not both. Let's go into, obviously, what we know. For Clemson, I know that they have one of the most potent offenses in the nation, led by one of the best quarterbacks, an abundance of talent to throw to out wide, and one of the more trustworthy offensive lines in the nation. I know that losing Phil Maffa to the NFL is a significant piece to replace, but I also know they have a staple of guys who will collectively aim to replace his talents. I also know that this team returns the second most production from last season, which is huge in week 1. Most teams have to put so many new things together at once. Clemson won't have to go through those early season lumps. And then for LSU, what I think I know about this program is that from a roster management perspective, they did everything within their power to make things easy for the head coach, stacking probably the best portal class on top of what was already a really talented roster. There is, to me, no reason for LSU to not be one of the best teams in the nation. If they do, that comes down to an evaluation of the head coach, the buy-in from the players, and just overall how things go from that specific level. Because I think the talent evaluators at LSU are great. I think the coordinators are really talented, specifically on defense. And I also think the roster is one of the best in the nation, again, on paper as we head into a new year. I also know that Blake Baker is one of the best defensive coordinators in the sport, was a fantastic addition to LSU's defense last year, and he gets the absolute most out of his players. Now, for LSU's defense, I don't think the first and third levels are of star caliber, but because of the way they play, where it's very aggressive, flying around on the backside, I think they'll just be better because of it. That being said, the linebacker room is pivotal for LSU's success this season. Whit Weeks was one of the lone bright spots for the team last year, and they all hope down in Louisiana that Harold Perkins can put the talent and health together in order to be the star he's supposed to be. And that is where I think really you unlock another level, is if both of them in tandem are fantastic and flying around. There's so many unique and creative things you can do defensively that will make life easier for those first and third units. So that is what I think I know from both of those teams. That is what I know from both of those teams. What I think I know from Clemson and LSU surrounds the same exact matchup. It's LSU's run game versus Clemson's run defense. For the LSU Tigers, I think I know the program has acknowledged its shortcomings on offense last season, being the offensive line and their run game, but correcting them is a whole other thing than just saying, oh yeah, we knew that was a problem. I think I know that from a talent perspective, the LSU offensive line is at a disadvantage against Clemson's front seven, but how much of a disadvantage? And how quickly will offensive coordinator Joe Sloan panic and revert back to the pass-happy ways of 2024 if they can't get things rolling between the tackles? I think very highly of Garrett Nussmeier, but I also think he's had to do way too much last season, and as a result had some really poor turnovers. You cannot be a one-dimensional team in the SEC. And I also don't think you can be one-dimensional against Clemson here in week one. So finding that balance, and maybe even more importantly, forcing that balance is paramount. I don't think you can just say, oh, well, our first two drives, we carried the ball 4 times for 6 yards, so now we're just going to throw it 50. I liken it to what we said about Iowa State, Kansas State over the weekend. Iowa State wasn't getting anything in the ground going, but they knew as the game wore on, they needed to have that balance. They needed to draw the defense in to take their deep shots toward the end zone. You need to do that if you are Joe Sloan operating this offense. You need to, on that third, fourth drive, still try and run the ball twice before passing. I think it's so crucial to not force yourselves to be one-dimensional by the third possession of the game. And what I think I know for Clemson is that Tom Allen was brought in to fix this run defense after it was the glaring weakness of 2024. Penn State the last 2 years had two top 10 run defenses in the nation, the best run defense in the nation in 2023. So I think he's going to be a nice addition, but how quickly does it just fix? Is it just like, oh, Tom Allen's in, Band-Aid's on, and everything's fine? Or is it we got to wait till like week 6, 7 for everything to get figured out? I also think that I know that defensive tackle Peter Woods is fully healthy heading into the year, and that combined with the development of their linebacker room should make a night and day difference in stopping the run. All that being said, I think I know that to be true. If LSU is somehow pushing this defensive front seven around in the trenches and Caden Durham has like 70 yards in the first half, that will be a really huge red flag, something that could be the biggest factor in the outcome of this game. Let's bring out the stat department. I'm rambling on. We're actually also losing a little bit of ink on this paper, so I'm just going to take a look over here for the stat department. So, oh, interesting. See, now this is an interesting stat. As good as Clemson has been under Dabo Swinney, he has not fared too well against the Southeastern Conference, going 3-7 straight up and 2-8 against the spread over their last 10 games. And we all know how Brian Kelly has struggled out the gate here for LSU, but did you know that Clemson has gone 4-4 straight up and 2-6 against the spread when starting their season against another Power 4 team? These are two teams that when the game gets going, the season gets going, and you're faced with a tough opponent, they haven't fared too well. And again, like I said, another indication here that, Dabo hasn't done too well against the Southeastern Conference. I almost forgot to take the nerd glasses off. I know that these numbers suggest LSU is just going to come in, roll over Clemson, but we have to remember that LSU is not your typical SEC team. And that's not where I say like they're of lesser talent or they don't compete. Like they've obviously been one of the storied programs, but under Brian Kelly, it's been a very one-dimensional type team. And that's not something that has hurt Clemson. When Clemson lost its 3 games to the SEC last year, Georgia, South Carolina, Texas, those teams averaged 250 yards on the ground. Again, Clemson's run defense was terrible last year. The SEC took it to their advantage. And I don't see that same mismatch here for the Tigers. I think Clemson should be able to run the football on LSU's defense. It's not to say I don't think LSU won't be able to keep up pace, but when we talk about like ways you can win, I think LSU can win in a shootout. They've won in shootouts the last few years. When they are airing the ball out, it's a very prolific offense. Clemson can do the same thing with Klubnik, the trio of receivers, and the offensive line. If this is a high-scoring, 38-34 game, I could see either team winning that. However, if Clemson decides to do what Georgia did to them last year and say, like, we're just going to run between the tackles, we're not going to give you that many shots for your offense to get things rolling, and we're just going to dominate the time of possession battle, we're going to make this a game that you can't match us in, I don't think LSU will have the ability to respond. That being said, I do think we're going to get something in between both of those results. I am going to take Clemson to squeak out a win. I'm going to take them by a score of 31-26. So again, that might be a little bit more high scoring, but when it's all said and done, I just don't know if LSU, they'll hang around like they have in all of these season openers. I think last year was the USC game where it was it just came down to a couple final plays. I think it's going to be a game very similar to that. But I am going to take Clemson to win at home here. It's not going to be a best bet. I do think they could cover the 3.5. The number is kind of a little shaky for me, but I'm going to take Clemson to win. I guess that would be an over bet as well too. But again, neither of these plays are going to be in my best bets of the week. So, and man, what a conversation we'll have on Monday if that's the case. Brian Kelly losing another season opener. Questions about how the season's going to go, especially if they can't run the football or if the offensive line, can't hold up against Clemson's defensive front. Really, really interesting. But that's how I see these games playing out, man. So we're going to take Texas to beat Ohio State, and we're going to take Texas +3 as our best bet, one of our best bets of the week. I also love Texas's team total of over 23.5. To be determined if there's other plays I like more than that, but those are the two I like in that game. We will be adding Alabama -13.5 as a best bet, and I think Clemson's going to get it done here. It's just one of those games that I don't feel super easy about, and then you give me a +3.5, and I'm like, I could see it being 31-28. I could see it being a game-winning field goal, and LSU is just because you get that hook, you end up losing your bet if you took Clemson, so it'll be a little bit of a stay away for me. But yeah, that's going to wrap up today's show. How are we doing on time, by the way? We're sitting at, that's a nice, beautiful 36, 37-ish minute show. Still got a whole lot more to do this week. We're obviously going to give you the rest of my bets on Friday's show. We still have to preview, I think, 2 more games, at least one. We're going to do a Miami Notre Dame preview for Sunday night on Friday's show. TBD on TCU, North Carolina, fun Monday night game. I don't know if it has the same attention, but maybe since it's a standalone, we'll talk about that. And then the thing that I think I'm most excited to do on Friday's show is I'm going to teach you guys, as a ball knower, how to watch college football. We're going to go into how many TVs you need, what games to put on what screens, and I'm just going to kind of paint you a little diagram of a ball knower's guide to watching college football. So, thank you all for supporting the show. Again, the socials at SpringBlake CFB. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. Please leave a like. Same thing if you are listening on Spotify, Apple, wherever you may get your podcasts. We're just a few days away. Things are going to be great. I appreciate you all, as always, for tuning into the show. I love you all, and I'll talk to you in a couple of days. Peace.